Well, thanks for staying with us. You're watching the Monday Report on this 6th day of February 2023. We want to get a quick snapshot of what's happening in the world of education, the state of education, with my two guests. I introduced them earlier. Let me introduce them once again. From my far left, Amos Kaburu, an education analyst. Thanks for making time for us this evening.
Happy New Year.
And Happy New Month.
You did send me Happy New Year.
As well. You must have missed it. Check again. I'm sure you have a long list of messages.
That's fine.
Thank you for joining us. And Janet Modoni-Oko also joins us as well, an education expert running the Tunza Mtoto Coalition and also former Education CEC Nairobi. To both of you, Karibu, I hope you had a chance to catch our broadcast. We had lots of education stories. And one that stood out is there are many children who, despite a stellar performance at KCPE, will not be joining their schools of choice owing to poverty. They say that education used to be a saving grace for many families in Kenya, but lately it now seems to be the preserve, or at least a quality education seems to be the preserve of the well-off. And there was a case study there of Lois Akinyi. What do you make of that? Are we in a better space right now than we were before? What's your take?
I think even the standard for today was very disheartening because it featured about 11 children that had done very well, 10 marks, 300, and called to big schools, but the story is the same, that they cannot be able to afford to go to school. So begs the question, so many years down the line after we gave ourselves a constitution that guarantees the right to education of every child, how are we doing? And really, we are not doing very, very well. And I think one of the girls, when you were running your interview, I listened to one of the girls saying that unless you want me to go to a day school. So I think we've run a secondary subsector that has glorified so much boarding school. Because why you hear children saying that they cannot afford this, because they cannot afford the cost of boarding. But everybody can afford the cost of day schooling. So I think begs the question, has government done enough to just make sure that even if your mother or your daddy doesn't have money, you can just walk to the neighboring day school, you pay zero, or at least you just manage the little lunch money that is probably being asked at school. And if you don't have even that lunch money, your mother can make for you food, pack in a tin, and you carry. Have we really walked the talk in terms of making sure that every child can access education? And I've said this many times, that really it is wrong and it is immoral for us to make sure that children depend on charity. Because all those children that were shown there on that newspaper, they're waiting for charity, a certain organization to show up and say, I will fund your education. I mean, even when that child is walking to the school, you know, the entire school is looking at her like, I mean, you guys could not afford. We've seen ridiculous stories of people being bought for boxes and they're written sponsored by a particular politician. We really need to make sure that education of our children does not depend on charity. Government needs to make sure that there are systems that guarantees every child their right to compulsory and quality education as guaranteed by the Constitution. And
off the back of what Janet has spoken towards, Amos, talk to us a little bit about the deployment of teachers to support the rollout of junior secondary school. And in one of the stories that we carried this evening, there was a concern that private schools began teaching the JSS curriculum last week. Maybe only 3 textbooks have come, or 14 as per that report, but some learning is going on. Meanwhile, for public schools, hopefully this week for some, hopefully next week for others as well, does that compound the situation that Janet is speaking?
Of course.
Words?
Does it come as a surprise? This one was already known by 2018. This is what we're already mentioning, that by the time you see the chaos that will come with the 2023, you'll begin to realize that somebody somewhere didn't pretty do their good work. The most unfortunate part of this conversation is that there is no time when government has pumped resources in education like it is doing at the moment. Yet when you look at the broad outcomes of education from the education goals, 8 of them, honestly speaking, I think the return on investment for our education is at an all-time low. Education for national unity, education for national development, education as a social equalizer, education for lifelong learning, whichever outcome you pick, I think that our education has turned out to be a fake promissory note, that whoever chooses to go and cash it, basically it bounces. And so we're talking about a situation where education doesn't work for the poor. It's systematically moved from being a public good towards a merited good. And so what it does in the long run is that education becomes a preserve for the few. And I was actually discussing with the journal that it's not, the issue is not about public. It's not a question of day schools. Close to 70% of our education in this country, which is in any form meaningful, is private education. Because even whatever we're calling good secondary school education in this country is pretty private, because what does government give? The capitation of 23,000 on the backdrop and leave the parents to pay over 30,000. In addition to that, they have to pay for boarding facilities. Honestly, the rest of this education is more private. And yet, on the other hand, if you have to compute two things, one, the cost of failure, because that's one of the things that we never do. I mean, how can we be so shameless as a country that 40,000 Kenyans are scoring grade E? They are coming out of the school system even without a name. Some of them even can't write their names. Do you know what 40,000 Kenyans are? They basically feel Kasarani. But we are so shameless that every year we're churning out 40,000 of them who are getting grade E's, and we celebrate a few of them who've scored, talk about 1,000 A's and say, wow, 1,000 have got. I mean, it's ridiculous that education, which was supposed to have given a space and an opportunity to the poor people of this country, the public policy as designed hasn't necessarily really worked for the poor people. And so there's a problem around how we design public policy. And I think, more or less, I think the challenge is around framing of our education policy. What is really the intention? Sometimes we listen to policymakers. I really sympathize with them. For instance, this government as it is, I really sympathize. You inherit chaos that were brought about the previous regime, not thinking about what it would really mean to implement junior secondary school. And this government is faced by a real test. I said that this is going to be a problem. And even before we go too far, I want to assure this country, there will be another task force before 2026. Watch this space.
On CBC, on
CBC, there will be another task force.
So, you know, the government reminds us that the train left the station 2-3 years ago. So what do you do right now? The train's left the station, there's no going back, and it's clear that now the only direction you can move is forward. But how do you move forward carrying as many students as possible? And could CBC have addressed some of the issues he's raised if properly implemented?
You know, well, the moment government goes back to where we are coming from, and that's what Kaburu is calling, sort of really thinking, what exactly are we doing? And knowing that there are so many other things that I know government has got so many priorities, but knowing that the priority that you have, especially things that you cannot take away from citizens of this country, priorities that have been given to you, it does not matter whether it was in your manifesto or it wasn't. But there is one particular supreme manifesto called the Constitution of this country.
That's correct.
So that you must first implement the Constitution in totality. I usually say, for example, look at someone giving a loan to somebody, of a hustler fund, for example. You give somebody 2,000 Kenya shillings. But you have not done what the Constitution has asked you to do. So that person will likely take that money and take it to school, or take it, for example, maybe to the hospital. You have defrauded that person. You have lied to that person that have helped you, that have deposited 2,000 shillings. Yet, I was supposed to have deposited that money in school so that your child goes there, finds free primary education, so that you don't even need the 2,000 anyway, because you collected the 2,000 to take it in school or to go deposit it in the healthcare system, because there are no drugs there. So we need to stop running a lie. We need to really be very serious about funding public education. And when you talk about funding public education, right now, all the way from 2017, the government does so well. It does 22,000 Kenya bob to every secondary school child goer. Since 2017, right now, everybody is crying about the cost of living. And you're telling me that even today, you're still doing 22,000. So where is your commitment? At least show us even the commitment by even adjusting it by the inflation cost, so that then you're not transferring all these burdens to the head teachers, because those burdens will be transferred to the head teachers. And that is why what Kaburu is saying, we might be taking our children to a public primary school. That is where it ends. Otherwise, everything else, every other transaction that goes on in there, it is private because it is paid for by a Kenyan that already paid tax and has already done so much, and a Kenyan that has not been given the entitlements that child has been promised by that particular constitution. So that for me, it's not enough to just be populist and promise everything else. Can you first get down to the business that this constitution has given the children of Kenya? Give the children of this country free. And when we say free, there's those people who criticize and say that people should meet the cost of giving birth. No. if it is so, let us go to a referendum and we rectify the constitution that we gave to ourselves. Otherwise, we are all hypocrites. How do you even as a president carry a constitution and say, I will defend this particular constitution if you disagreed with certain issues? For example, if you don't believe in free and compulsory, basic education, I mean, you need to actually, verbalize it. Say that I do not believe in this, because initiate a conversation. Let's all have that conversation. Otherwise, as it is now, I usually say this because I know, as we speak now, Wahiga, there's a family that doesn't have even that 100 shillings. And that is a family that I represent. I do not represent those parents that have got choice, that today they can take their children here or they can take... We are not represented by myself. I represent that family today because I know the cost of not taking that child to school, the cost of having a child that dropped out in class 3. I know as a citizen of this country, I know how that affects me as a citizen as well. So we really need to carry everybody along. And carrying everybody along means government must reprioritize. There are so many things that are being said and being done, a lot of which are populist. But if you're really a populist government, can you begin by implementing the constitution of this country to its totality?
That you swore to. Yeah, Amos, it's one thing to talk, all these things that we're discussing in a nice air-conditioned studio here in Nairobi. But it's a different thing, it appears, and I'm going to use a hypothetical example. If you suddenly woke up tomorrow and find you're the senior advisor to the Education Ministry, a lot of realities there would then make you change what you'd then tell us in the next interview.
Not necessarily.
From a budget perspective, suddenly realize the money that we're talking about isn't as readily available as possible. Or many other... Okay, you seem to want to respond before I finish.
I am very consistent.
Is there a possibility that the Ministry of Education has few options before it, and what we are seeing is it trying to navigate those options?
Not necessarily. Mr. President, let me address my beloved president. Just ask this institution that sits on Murang'a Road in the next 2 weeks to give you a brief that is not more than 2 pages on the implementation of functional literacy. That's what this country needs. Just 7 elements. I mean, this addresses a serious question that we call, you can't sell hope in the name of an education nurturing everybody's potential. You can't have an education that gives everybody what they want. Societies don't work that way. We design systems that deliver what we call dignity. Ask KICD that what are the must-haves for everyone. Honestly, the problems that we're having in KICD, in this implementation of CBC 844, has problems of this poorly funded institution called KICD, no human resource, less than 1,000 people, even they have got no resources. Do you know that, for your information, that even KICD doesn't have a laboratory? They could even be telling us that the luminous and non-luminous fire, but it's no longer luminous, or the potassium permanganate, whatever. Well, I mean, the whole point that I'm putting across, Wahiga, yes, the whole point that I'm putting across is that, honestly, KICD will do much more. And what will they do? It is not right that you can increase the cost of education by close to 600%. What do I mean? If government was spending and giving a capitation of 1,450 shillings for a child in grade 7, how do you increase that one now to reach 10,000? Children were doing 7 subjects, now you've increased to 14. Does it make it cheaper or does it make it expensive? The whole point is that you end up spreading the very, very little resources that you have in education extremely thin. So what we need to agree as a country is what are the must-haves that every child should have when they are leaving basic education. And that's what you call functional literacy. Every child is able to read, every child is able to count, and every child is able to apply specific concepts in their real life. That is what you need. Then we can ask that what do we need for education to deliver in terms of national priorities. My friend, let me tell you, the challenge we are having over here is that we are over-promising that education can solve societal problems. The problems that we have in this country are not because of education. And this is the highest time that education stakeholders should stop this inward-looking conversation. And I've said time and again, where do we have KNBS in education conversations? Where do we have central bank in all these conversations? We keep on talking to ourselves, calling ourselves experts and professors, arguing over methodology and our old theories of Piaget and Vygotsky and whatever, yet we are unable to confront real issues ahead of us. I can tell you that an education system cannot create jobs. And that's the fallacy that we are selling to Kenya, that CBC will come and solve all your problems. It is a question of reconfiguring the economy to provide jobs. It's a question of how do you convince people with money not to invest in all these high-rise buildings, but to end up, honestly, putting up some factories of 10, 20 people for them to provide jobs. But when we end up telling people that this education system will solve all the problems, we actually end up selling hope. And yet we know that education has a very complex complex value chain. It's not possible for you to deliver the desired outcomes and results that you want. Unlike what it is with a road, you construct a road, the following day you see the traffic situation has improved. You vaccinate people in healthcare. I mean, today if I'm selling to you, telling you that self-efficacy will work next year, you never know if it works. The 21st century skills, even nobody knows whether they are 25, whether they are 47 and whatever. So that's why I'm saying that it is just necessary that the institutions in the Ministry of Education have, one, the courage, number two, they are properly funded so that they do the right thing. And that's all that we are asking for.
Courage, funding.
Yeah. Courage and funding, because KICDF is very, very courageous to say that this is what this country requires. Honestly, we are able to do the right thing. But just going to sell hope that we can match everybody's potential, it is not possible. People only have got 3 rights in life: the right to birth, the right to death, and the right to self-determination. And education can play a limited role in terms of realizing, self-determination. But it is not an end in itself. It is necessary, but not sufficient.
You've given us a lot to think about, and I think that's a good point to take a break. Wow, education, lots to talk about, and something that touches millions of, actually everyone watching this broadcast, whether locally or watching us from other countries. And that's a discussion we continue on the other side. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Right now, we have a bigger problem than that.
Why do we need to keep on repeating the same things to you every time? Hey, sasa mimi nakuambia tushikane. Tuhakikishe huyu sisi tumemsababisha.
Solid triple refined vegetable cooking oil. The secret to tasty meals. Siri ndio hiyo.
Shinda mameli na Shabiki Jackpot Mbao. Pata bonuses nzito na Shabiki Jackpot Mbao. Cheza sasa na shilingi 20 tu. BCLB number 416.
Well, thanks for staying with us. We're taking a snapshot of the education sector this evening. We won't be able to complete what are many talking points around that, but we're just picking the minds of education experts here. Tane Modhoni Ouko, who's an education analyst, runs her own organization, and a former education CC in Nairobi, and Amos Kaburu, an education analyst. Janet, on the question of Form 1, we've had many parents complaining that as many as 10 different schools claimed that they were selected to join those schools. I don't know if that number is accurate, but it's an approximation. Won't these parents now be open to undue stress in this whole matter of Form 1 selection? What are you hearing about that?
Well, you know, every year, you know, year in, year out, we sit here and we really discuss how agonizing it is for children, especially. Sometimes I don't care so much about parents because, I mean, they've gone through their own. But now I imagine a child who really had very high expectations to join a particular school, and then they're turned down, and it becomes really disturbing. But I was discussing with some other people, especially because this time round, I'm a Form 1 parent. And I've had somebody here in my house who was very expectant, and his expectations were never met. And as a parent, I took it upon myself to really tell him that, look, your mother is not the owner of Alliance, your mother is not the owner of, you know, so that really, even as parents and as society, how do we, I know I'm in a position where I could probably influence my way, you know, through, you know, but what message especially are you sending to the child? And are you part of the solution? Because not all children can fit in Kenya High, not all children can. And then also the problem of our own government, that government did not care to create 10 Kenya Highs, for example, so at least the tension is a little bit deflated. So it's going to take us quite some time. And I think tonight I really want to ask the Ministry of Education to vigorously take it upon itself to educate its own public. For example, how do you I've received calls from parents who come maybe from Kisumu, and they're telling me, no, my child was called to Bishop Gatimu Gandu. And they don't want that school, and they don't want it. And I'm like, what do you mean? Because from where I sit, Bishop Gatimu Gandu, I mean, is a giant, and every girl from central Kenya wants to go to Bishop Gatimu. So I think if the ministry has decided that I can get you from Kisii and I post you to Nyeri, for example, the same ministry has got a responsibility to enlighten the public about a lot of these schools, so that at least we don't see the pressure that parents are going through, because even parents also have the pressure. Especially, I saw 2 weeks ago, a child was threatening us with suicide, that I'm going to commit suicide because I have not been called to my dream school. So there's quite some bit of work there to be done. But a lot of work is about our own perception, how we perceive certain schools. I was discussing with one professor, and I liked what he told me. He told me, Janet, look, you will tell a parent that this is a small school. It has a candidature of about 100. Out of that 100, 2 scored an A. They had 2 A's. But there's a school here that has a candidature of 400. Out of the entire 400, they had 8 A's. In your view, which school, I mean, so the Ministry of Education, because it is the same Ministry of Education that has perpetuated this particular story, that there are some schools that are better than others. When I listened to that girl that was saying that, I really want to my dream to come true, I don't want to go to a day school, and I sympathized. And I said, look at government selling one thing and doing the complete opposite. A government that is committing that by, I don't know which year, they will admire that secondary school becomes day. Yet, the same government is today allocating Mangina, the only national school in Mombasa County, 288 girls. Knowing too well, they have a vacancy of 200. In the same Mombasa, you will go to some schools, the so-called day schools, and you find that the schools are struggling to break even because they cannot attract, the kind of candidature required. Even when you get your capitation, you cannot be able to put up a dormitory. You cannot, it's some basic infrastructure. The same ministry that sits with that data, why didn't it consider rationalizing and sending? If really the ministry believes that all our schools are the same, or at least somebody will enjoy the same kind of education as everywhere else, why are you congesting others and letting some schools struggle? I know a friend of mine who's a board member in a school, and he called me over the last holiday and was telling me, Janet, we are contemplating closing this school. I'm like, why are you closing a school? No, because we cannot get enough. So the theory about congestion is in some particular schools. And some other schools are suffering. They cannot even get, the right amount of children. But who is this person that is appropriating where do children go? It is the same Ministry of Education. So let the Ministry of Education really get their act in order. And let them also contribute to inspiring people that these day schools they are preaching are as good as any other school. I
think that point has come out quite clearly. Amos, let me hear from you and in case you want to respond to that, even as you continue to buttress your point on what resources will be needed to see CBC really become a success.
I think we need to celebrate a number of day schools. They are very good. I want to celebrate a school in my neighborhood, Wamalwa Kijana Secondary School in Bungoma Town, Namachanja, Nambale Day. We're talking about schools such as Kericho Day. Have consistently posted wonderful results. I think I agree with Janet that it's good that ministry is very, very consistent so that it tells the stories of these very, very positive cases that are doing extremely well. I think we've had another very good day school in my vicinity that was just affected by these delocalization issues and all that. But I think the larger issue around here is the question of the role that communities need to play in terms of, one, thinking about schools and really supporting those schools to come up. I think what I've failed over time is that in the history of our schools in this country, communities have over time lost their spaces. And yet when you look at the role communities have played is extremely big. Communities gave land even to Alliance. Communities sacrificed to give land to Kenya High. I mean, and later on, after they have even raised a lot of money through the Harambee schools, government just comes and takes over our schools, and then it just changes policies all of a sudden. Our school, which was serving the needs of the local community, is converted into a boarding school. It becomes extremely expensive, the children from the neighborhood. And that's actually when you walk across this country, you realize that adjacent to every big secondary school, which is either extra county or national, there's actually an adjacent day school because the local community really doesn't feel that it's benefiting. That's why I think it was a very good initiative one time under Dr. Matiang'i that these national schools ought to have a day wing, because we also keep on increasing and communities have a sense of the school is appreciating, because it is part of the resources. It's an infrastructure. I mean, my school, Archbishop Nyengagas, which is next to my village, we've donated a lot of our land. They even use our Catholic church at Chekalini Parish. Every single day, every Sunday, they even don't wash the church, honestly. Can you really just appreciate by giving us at least 60 spaces in that school? So I think it's just important to really rethink about how can communities benefit a little bit more from this resource, because communities have spent a lot of resources providing goodwill, providing the resources, the land on which the schools are built, and such and such. On the question of CBC, I totally believe,
briefly,
yes, I totally believe that, yes, we can actually find what I call a homegrown solution of CBC. Otherwise, moving with the ideal CBC as it is, I really don't think that it will serve the interests of this country. What we need to go back is to ask ourselves this question: what education is needed by all children? That is a fundamental question that we must resolve. And then we go to task KICD that it is not right to give us an expensive curriculum as you have done. Honestly, it just doesn't make sense as to why we are moving away from 7 subjects in class 7 to go to 14. How can that, honestly, that is ridiculous. Just tell us that a child who is leaving primary school should be able to do 1, 2, 3, 4 things. Even the 7 competences, why don't you put them into 7, honestly? Because you see, when you have got 14, what does it mean? It means that you have to timetable for the 14, you must have teachers for the 14, you must have textbooks for the 14.
Okay.
And assuming that you have got 1 million students into grade 7, and each book is costing 400 shillings, add to it again this madness that we've called workbooks of again another 400 shillings, that's 800 shillings, multiplied by 7, that's just an additional cost of 5,600 that is already not available. Honestly, I strongly believe that our education is overfunded.
Okay.
The challenge is the question of how we have configured, how we should actually use that resource. Okay. And that is what I hope that His Excellency the President can now task Treasury to ask the Ministry of Education that tell us what is the value that every dollar that we are putting in education should give us. Otherwise, just this defeatist approach of give us more money from where? This country is not is not an oil mine whereby we are mining money from everywhere. Education should account for the billions that it has received, more than 3 trillion in less than 10 years. I think we need to have better outcomes than what we have seen. That is a challenge that the Minister of Education should actually be willing to take on.
And I think that's a good place to leave it. We have had Amos Kabura, an education analyst, very passionate in his responses. Thank you. And always a pleasure to have you here. Janet Muthoni-Ouko, who was a former education CEC in Nairobi. What did the Form 1 in your house finally decide? Have they started to settle?
Yeah, they've settled.
You manage this.
I have to manage.
Situation. What parents are going through, and a very real example here from one of our guests. And that's where we conclude. But we'll have more conversations like this. Trevor Ombija will be back next week. And I'm sure he'll carry on with his focus on education, really just helping you answer some of the questions you have at this time of great transitions in the education sector. 2243 is the SMS line, hashtag Monday Report. Let's keep engaging online. But for now, this is where this broadcast comes to an end. Thank you so much for having tuned in from the start till the end, and assisting us on sign language interpretation has been Njoki Shege. On behalf of the whole team this evening, thank you for staying with us. Thank you to my guests once again. We say good night, stay safe. I'll see you tomorrow, and God bless. Good night for now. My name is Wahiga Mwaura.